All right, let's talk about something pretty chilling today. We're diving into this idea from our source material called institutional creep. And get this, it argues that the abuse we see in our most trusted institutions, churches, schools, sports leagues, it's not some random accident. It's actually part of a system, a kind of procurement pipeline. So let's break down how this is all supposed to work.
You know the drill, right? Whenever a scandal hits the news, the first thing we hear is the bad apple excuse. But what if that's completely missing the point? The source material we're digging into today poses a much more disturbing question. What if the problem isn't a few bad apples in the barrel? What if the barrel itself is rotten?
To really get our heads around that question, first we have to pick apart the story we are almost always told. It's what our source calls the bad apple myth.
And here it is. This is the official narrative we all know so well. Some lone predator, a rogue agent, somehow slipped through the cracks and betrayed the noble mission of an otherwise totally good organization. It's a comforting story, isn't it? Because it frames the problem as this isolated glitch, something that can just be patched up and fixed. Okay, so this slide really puts it all on the table. On the one hand, you've got the official narrative we just talked about, the bad apple, the anomaly. But on the other hand, you have this absolutely radical alternative that the source calls the Gnostic Indictment. And the argument here is that abuse isn't a bug, it's a feature. The system isn't broken at all, it's actually a predatory ecosystem that's working exactly as it was designed to.
So how on earth could a system be designed for something so awful? Well, to get it, we need to understand a really key concept from the source material, this idea of the Institutional Egregor.
Now, egregor. It sounds a little out there, I know. But according to the source, it's basically like a collective entity, born from our shared belief in something. So try to think of a church or a sports federation, not just as a building or a group of people, but as its own kind of living thing. And its number one priority? It isn't protecting the innocent. It's self-preservation. It will do anything to protect its brand, its funding, its power.
So think about it. If an institution's main goal is just to protect itself, it ends up creating the absolute perfect environment for predators to operate in. I mean, these structures are built to centralize power, demand total obedience, and isolate the vulnerable, all while hiding behind a trusted, respected brand. As the source argues, these institutions don't just let predators in by accident, they basically become the perfect hunting grounds.
And this leads us to the next really chilling part of this whole argument. The source claims there's a specific protocol that these institutions use, a step-by-step process for, as it puts it, architecting a victim.
So here's the 4-step protocol. It all starts with what's called the halo effect. A priest's collar or a coach's team jacket. It just disarms our natural parental instincts. Then comes the isolation. The promising young athlete gets sent off to a special training facility. The child actor is told that their parents just don't understand the industry. And once they're isolated, their own ambition is weaponized against them. Their dream of making it to the Olympics or landing that big role becomes the leverage to demand total submission. And the final cruel step? Gaslighting. Using the institution's immense power to convince the victim that somehow this is all their fault.
But what happens when the abuse is actually reported? What happens when a victim speaks up? Well, this is where, according to the source, the egregor's immune system kicks into high gear. It's all about what it calls the economics of silence.
See, this defense playbook isn't about finding the truth. It's all about damage control. Complaints get lost in these endless internal investigations that go nowhere. Predators? Oh, they're just quietly reassigned. The classic pass-the-trash maneuver, moving the problem to a new flock. If a victim actually persists, then the legal war chest opens up, deploying armies of lawyers and PR firms to completely exhaust and silence them. And ultimately, tax-exempt or corporate money is used to buy silence and just make the crime disappear.
And this all brings us to the final, biggest question. How does this same pattern persist for decades across so many different kinds of institutions without any real, systematic change?
Well, the source argues that it's not just an internal problem. The entire system is insulated from the outside by two incredibly powerful forces that make sure this cycle just keeps on going.
And here they are, the external shields. First, on the left, you have media capture. I mean, just think about it for a second. Are major TV networks really likely to run a deep, critical investigation into the sports leagues or the movie studios that are also their biggest advertisers? The argument is probably not. The truth gets held hostage by the ad budget. Then, on the right, you have regulatory theater. When a scandal gets so big that it can't be ignored, the government steps in. They form commissions, they announce new guidelines, but the core power structures that allowed all this to happen in the first place, they're almost never touched. It's the appearance of action with no real change.
And that leaves us with the core argument from our source material summed up right here on the screen. From this perspective, abuse isn't a glitch in the system, it's a structural feature, operating quietly behind the scenes, all under the protection of brands that we are taught to trust and admire. It's a really challenging idea, for sure, and one that completely reframes the entire conversation.